30 lawyers failed, but the poor assistant fixed everything and made him a millionaire. You are dismissed, Mr. Bennett. The judge's sharp voice echoed through the courtroom like a final verdict. Harold remained standing, not moving a muscle, simply taking a deep breath, his broad shoulders still held high with dignity. He didn't look at anyone, not the lawyers beside him, not the children seated in opposing rows. Only when the gavel struck the podium with a dry thud did he blink. He left the room in silence. The slow footsteps on the marble floor were the only sounds accompanying him to the courthouse lobby. Outside, the late afternoon sun seemed to mock the darkness settling inside him. 30 lawyers, Harold, murmured Richard, the legal consultant who had been with him since the beginning of the case. 30. Harold stopped mid-stride and slowly turned his face. His eyes were light and cold, and even with his hair completely white, he still carried an imposing air. He looked like someone who didn't ask permission, but now he just looked tired. You can go now, Richard. I'll take myself home. I said you can go. There was no reply. Richard simply nodded, a restrained gesture, too familiar with Harold's demeanor to protest. That's what Harold did. He ended conversations, deals, marriages, with firmness and few words. But this time he had lost, not just any fight. He had lost a battle that touched everything he had built, and deep down the last anchor tying him to the memory of his wife. Catherine's will, written over 40 years ago, was now entangled in a web of legal disputes, lost documents and misinterpreted clauses. Catherine had died 7 years earlier. Since then, Harold had waged a silent war to keep intact the house where they had raised their children, the land inherited from her father, the family business. But the children, 3 cold, ambitious men, wanted liquidity. They wanted to sell everything, and they had found loopholes to do so. Harold had been fighting them in court ever since. And now, with yet another lawyer throwing in the towel, he knew maybe this really was the end of the line. That night at home, Harold allowed himself a rare gesture. He sat in front of the unlit fireplace, an aged whiskey in his large, steady hands, and let the silence fill the rooms, as if waiting for a response that never came. Everything seemed untouched. The furniture Catherine had chosen, her books still lined up on the shelf, the framed photographs, but nothing warmed the place anymore. He heard soft footsteps behind him, but didn't turn around. Mr. Bennett, may I leave the documents here on the table? It was a female voice, gentle, the kind that always spoke with care, as if asking permission to exist. Maria. Go ahead, Maria. She placed the folder on the side table next to a worn leather armchair. She didn't dare sit. Maria Alvarez was a legal assistant at the law firm handling Harold's case. She had been involved since the beginning, but never noticed beyond what was necessary. Brown hair tied in a bun, large glasses and hands always busy with papers. She worked hard, spoke little. She came from far away, in geography and in life. Do you need anything else tonight, sir? Harold shook his head, still not looking at her. No, you can go. And thank you. Maria hesitated for a second, as if wanting to say something but thought better of it, and left quietly. When the door closed, he turned his gaze back to the unlit fireplace. He raised the glass to his lips but didn't drink. Only then did he notice that his hands were trembling. In the days that followed, Harold tried to return to his routine. He walked every morning, read the newspapers, answered emails. But there was a slowness to every movement, as if the weight of failure had changed even the rhythm of time. He didn't take calls from his children, avoided old colleagues. Not even the golf club gatherings interested him anymore. The truth was, for the first time in decades, he didn't know what to do. On a rainy morning, he decided to visit the headquarters of his former business group, not because he had to, but because he needed to see something still working. When he arrived, he greeted the receptionist with a discreet nod, crossed the lobby and entered the elevator. On the 10th floor, the environment looked nothing like he remembered. Too modern, too young. Most of the faces were unfamiliar. Mr. Bennett, said a blond young man in a blue blazer with an overly enthusiastic smile. What a pleasure to see you here. Harold simply nodded and walked to his old office. It wasn't his anymore, of course. It now belonged to the new CEO, a guy in his 30s who treated the company like a startup. He stood there for a few minutes, silently observing the rain-soaked city through the glass windows, and in that moment, he realized he no longer had a place in that world. As he left the building, he decided not to go straight home. He asked the driver to take him to the old property at the center of the dispute, the farm where he and Catherine had raised their children, planted apple trees, renovated the barn with their own hands. It was still standing, but now just a frozen asset in the legal process. Isolated, closed, cold. Standing before the rusted gate, Harold took a deep breath. This wasn't just a piece of land. It was his story. And even if no one else cared, he couldn't just let it vanish. "I'm not giving up on you," he murmured, almost as if speaking to Catherine, "even if the whole world does." He returned home with one thought circling his mind. Maybe he needed someone who wasn't bound by the rules of the game, someone who still paid attention to the details, someone like Maria. "They forgot to number this document," Maria muttered, furrowing her brow as she slid her finger across the last page of the petition. Again. Alone in the small back room of the Silva and Barros law office, she was doing what she always did, fixing the mistakes overlooked by the well-paid attorneys. It was nearly 8 p.m., and everyone else had already gone home. Only the hum of the old ceiling fan and the soft rustling of pens and paper kept her company in the quiet routine. Maria Alvarez, 34, didn't have much going for her in the eyes of the world. The daughter of immigrants raised in the northern part of the city, caring for her sick mother, raising her 9-year-old son on her own. But there was one thing no one could take from her: discipline. She didn't just do her job, she understood it. She paid attention to the subtext, the gaps, the things left unsaid. And because of that, even if no one said it out loud, everyone knew. If something really needed to be solved, it ended up on Maria's desk. She set aside the corrected petition and reached for a new envelope. It was one of those forgotten packets shelved in the corner, labeled Bennett. Probably an old attachment that had never been processed. She opened it carefully and found a worn leather folder. Inside was a bundle of yellowed papers and a thin notebook with a floral fabric cover. "This isn't legal material," she murmured, flipping through the notebook. As she opened it, she instantly recognized the feminine handwriting, strong and elegant. Catherine Bennett. It was a diary, or something like one. Page after page of personal notes, travel memories, recipes, quotes, all written with love and care. Maria hesitated for a moment, feeling like she was invading something deeply private, but then she noticed a folded sheet taped to the inside of the cover. It was a letter. She gently pulled it loose and unfolded it. The paper was yellowed but intact, and at first glance the contents seemed to be nothing more than a sentimental message from Catherine to Harold, until something caught her eye. A passage in the middle of the letter mentioned, "The account we opened together in 1981 in my maiden name to protect your father's shares." A quiet, almost innocent line nestled among affectionate memories. But to Maria, it rang like a church bell. She grabbed her phone and quickly searched the court system. Nothing about that account appeared in the case records, no mention of it, no citation in any of the pleadings. It was as if it had never existed. But Catherine had written it clearly. Account opened in her maiden name, shares from her father, year 1981. Maria knew the case well enough to understand that any investment from that time, tied to those shares, could change everything. Suddenly, her mind began to race. Every piece of the puzzle took on new meaning. If that account really existed, it could prove that part of the contested assets weren't part of the estate. They were protected as Catherine's individual property. And that changed everything. She leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. No one knew about this. No one had ever mentioned this letter. It had been sitting there, forgotten, all this time. She checked the clock. Almost 9 p.m. She thought about calling someone, but doubted any attorney would take a call from a legal assistant, especially at that hour. The next morning, she arrived early. Before the coffee was even ready, she had already scanned and printed the letter, compared it with the case documents, checked records at old banks, and reviewed digital government archives. There was no doubt. The information was real. She waited anxiously for Harold Bennett to arrive for a scheduled meeting with the firm's partners. When she saw him walking down the hallway, dark suit, steady steps even at his age, she felt a lump in her throat. "Mr. Bennett," she called out respectfully, holding the folder in her hands. He stopped, turned, raising an eyebrow slightly. His eyes settled on her like someone seeing a person for the first time. "Yes?" She hesitated for a second. "I found something in your case files." Mrs. Catherine left a letter. It was tucked inside a journal that came with a batch of old documents. The letter mentions an account opened in 1981 in her maiden name, tied to her father's shares. This could change the course of the case. Harold frowned. He was used to empty promises. But there was something in Maria's voice, something in her eyes, the seriousness, the honesty that made him pay attention. "Show me." She opened the folder, handed him the documents, and pointed out the key passages with steady fingers. She explained calmly. She didn't get flustered. She spoke like someone who knew what she was talking about, but with humility. Harold read in silence, flipped back a few pages, read again. When he finished, he looked at her with a different expression, not skepticism, but surprise. "And why has no one told me about this before?" No one knew. It was hidden among papers no one had looked at since the beginning of the case. "I only found it because I was reviewing files from the latest shipment from the old house." He stayed quiet for a long moment. Then finally he said, "Do you believe this information can make a difference?" "I believe this information is the difference, Mr. Bennett." Harold took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but a spark, a flash. "All right, keep going. Follow this through. Do whatever it takes." She nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." As he continued to the meeting room, Maria returned to her desk, holding Catherine's journal like it was a relic. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt she could change something, that she could make a difference, even if she was just an assistant, even if she was invisible to almost everyone, but not to him, not anymore. "Sorry, I just wanted to understand why this part is crossed out," Maria whispered to herself. The diary open on the desk, her fingers carefully gliding over the yellowed pages. That Saturday morning, the office was closed, but she had asked for permission to come in, saying she needed to organize some pending files. No one minded, she was just the assistant. Who would even notice? The leather folder she had found days earlier, along with Catherine's diary, was still on her desk, separated into small stacks. Maria had spent the last few nights reviewing everything, from old meeting minutes to contracts, receipts, and handwritten letters. What had once looked like a pile of old paper was now taking shape. There was a connection between it all. Small clues left by someone who had clearly cared about protecting what she had built with Harold. But that morning, Maria had decided to return to the starting point, the diary. Slowly turning the pages, she found the section with the letter again, and next to it, a nearly illegible scribble where Catherine mentioned a name. Vale Verde Custody House. Maria typed it into her phone. Nothing came up in the initial results. She tried variations, adding Bennett and 1981. After a few minutes, a link from the National Archive blinked on the screen. Reports of preserved assets in financial institutions before the collar plan, she read aloud. She clicked it, searched for Catherine's name. Nothing. Then she tried her maiden name. The screen loaded slowly, as if it too sensed something important was about to appear. There you are. It was an inactive account number, linked to an investment fund in shares from Catherine's father's old company. Initial value, $50,000, adjusted with accumulated returns. Maria swallowed hard. This could be worth millions. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled slightly as she printed the report, typed out notes, cross-checked the dates with the will and with the commercial registry. Not only did the account exist, it had never been disclosed in probate. Technically, the assets linked to that investment were outside the inheritance, and more than that, they were protected as Catherine's personal property. In theory, they couldn't be contested by the children or folded into the estate. "This is it," she whispered, bringing her hands to her mouth. She sat for a moment, trying to absorb what it all meant. For years, Harold had been trying to prove that parts of his wife's property should never have been part of the family dispute. No one had succeeded. But now, with this document, there was a trail, a real way out. And the person who had discovered it all was her. An assistant, who until just days ago no one even called by her full name. She decided to go to the old farm property that same afternoon. She needed to see it with her own eyes, to know if there was anything else that could confirm what was in the papers. She ordered a rideshare, printed everything into a folder, and set off with her heart pounding. The property was just over an hour from the city. The sky was clear, but the wind was cold. Maria looked out the car window as if seeing everything for the first time. Every curve in the road, every utility pole in the fields. When they arrived, the iron gate was locked, but slightly ajar. She pushed it gently and stepped inside. The place looked exactly as abandoned as it did in the photos from the case. Overgrown grass, shuttered windows, a rust-covered barn. But something about the silence touched her. A kind of peace you don't find in courtrooms or offices. She walked up to the main house. The windows still had floral curtains, some were torn. She tried the front door handle. Locked. She went around the house. On the side there was a smaller entrance. One of the windows was slightly open. With some effort, she pushed it and climbed in. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. Nothing had been taken. Furniture draped in white sheets, old paintings on the walls, books, clocks, a record player in the corner, as if someone had just stepped out for a walk and never returned. In the hallway on the second floor, she found what looked like the couple's old bedroom. She opened the door carefully. This was where Catherine had written the diary. She was certain. On the old writing desk, a small hardcover notebook still sat. Maria approached with caution, as if stepping up to an altar. She flipped through the notebook. It was older than the other one, dated 1979. Many entries about the start of the marriage, financial decisions, house renovations, the construction of the barn. And then, on one of the last pages, she found a hand-drawn map with markings, the reading room. She rushed downstairs, searching for the marked room. When she found it, she saw a built-in bookshelf filled with dusty books. In the bottom right corner, a vacant space, and just behind it, a compartment with wooden hinges, a small safe built into the wall. Her heart nearly stopped. Oh my God! She tried turning the lock, but it needed a combination. She didn't force it. She simply took a photo, noted the location, and stepped back outside with quick steps and a mind on fire. Back in the city that evening, Maria stood outside Harold's building. She thought about going up, about handing everything over immediately. But she hesitated. What she was about to do wasn't just deliver documents. It was about changing the course of a life, of a story, and maybe her own too. She decided to wait until the next day. She wanted to organize the data better, present everything clearly, securely, with the care that man deserved. Because now, more than ever, she knew Harold Bennett needed more than just a lawyer. He needed someone who saw what no one else did, and she was ready to be that person. "Would you like sugar in your tea?" Maria asked, balancing the tray with 2 cups, a pitcher of water, and the documents neatly organized in freshly printed folders. Harold Bennett was seated in his living room, the same place where he used to sit in silence before the unlit fireplace. But that morning, he was sitting straighter, more alert. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled precisely to his elbows, and an old wristwatch on his left arm. A wedding gift from Catherine, which he only wore on occasions he considered important. "No sugar," he replied, his voice deep but lighter than in previous days. Maria nodded, set the tray on the side table and opened the folder with measured movements. "Mr. Bennett, here's the full report with the information I found. Mrs. Catherine's letter, the mention of the account, the National Archive records, and..." She pulled out a highlighted page. This map with the possible location of a safe on the old property. Harold took the page without saying a word, examining the map with narrowed eyes. His fingers slowed as he traced each line. Then he looked up at her with the same expression he had when they first met, but now steadier, genuine curiosity mixed with something rare, respect. "And you found this on your own?" "Yes, sir. I wanted to understand the documents better before suggesting anything to the attorneys. And I also thought that, well, you deserved a full explanation." Harold didn't respond immediately. He turned the teacup in his hands, staring at the liquid for a moment. Finally, he spoke. "Catherine used to say that a person's worth was revealed by what they did when no one was watching." "She was very wise," Maria replied, offering a faint smile. "She was," he said, not smiling back but with a softer gaze. "Go on." Maria arranged the documents in order. She began by explaining the data from the account found in the historical archive, the estimated earnings over 4 decades, the absence of that account in the official probate records, and, most importantly, how it had been opened in Catherine's maiden name before the marriage, classifying it as separate property. This means that the funds and any assets tied to them, including part of the property currently in dispute, should not have been included in the estate. Legally, they belong solely to Mrs. Catherine, and by extension to you. Harold leaned back in his chair. He remained silent, but his eyes were active. He was processing it all with the calm of someone who had lived too long to react impulsively. Then he asked, "And the safe?" "It needs a combination to open. I didn't force it, but I believe it's been locked for decades, possibly since she got sick. It's built into the bookshelf in the old reading room, very well hidden. Do you remember anything like that?" Harold brought a hand to his chin, thoughtful. He paused for several seconds. "I remember her insisting on hiding important documents, said it was safer than the bank, but I never knew there was a safe there." He stood with effort, as if the weight of the past was still on his shoulders. He walked to the window and stared out at the street in silence. "My sons will do everything they can to discredit this discovery. They have the best lawyers money can buy. They'll try to convince the judge that you fabricated the evidence." "I know," Maria replied firmly. "That's why I made certified copies. I registered the digital files with hashed timestamps at an electronic notary. I also consulted a friend who specializes in document forensics. The letter's authenticity can be verified, and the account record, well, it's from a government bank. It's official." Harold turned slowly, as if seeing her for the first time in full clarity. "And why are you doing this, Maria?" She took a deep breath. She knew that question would come, and there was no rehearsed answer. "Because no one else is looking with their heart. Because this case has become just a fight over money, and I saw a woman trying to protect her story, her love, what she built with you, and—" She hesitated, lowering her voice slightly. "Because you seem like a man who still cares." Harold pressed his lips together, unsure how to respond. For a moment the room fell silent, and in that silence, something shifted. Her presence was no longer invisible. She wasn't just the assistant who carried folders and sorted papers. She was a woman who, without being asked, had delved into the deepest forgotten part of his life and retrieved something he himself had buried. Hope. "I want you to continue," he said at last, "but this time, as an active part of the case. I'll speak with the partners at the firm. If anyone has a problem with it, I'll handle it personally. Mr. Bennett, I'm not a lawyer. Not yet." "Yet," he repeated, and this time he smiled for the first time. "But you've got more courage than most lawyers I've ever met." Maria lowered her head respectfully. She felt a different kind of warmth in her chest. Not pride, not vanity. Something simpler and rarer, recognition. That afternoon, the two of them drove to the farm together. Maria sat in the passenger seat, holding the folder tightly against her chest. Harold drove himself the way he used to, with steady hands on the wheel and alert eyes. The drive to the property was quiet, but comfortable. There was no need for words. When they arrived, Harold got out first, studying the entrance, the windows, the porch littered with dry leaves. He took a deep breath. "The last time I was here was at Catherine's funeral. After that, I never came back." Maria just nodded, waiting. He opened the gate and entered the house with ease. The scent of old wood and memory embraced them instantly. "The reading room is this way," he said, pointing. They walked together to the bookshelf. Harold knelt before the space Maria had indicated. He pulled out a few books, found the wooden panel, and then, as if his body remembered something his mind had forgotten, he slowly turned the numbers on the small round dial embedded in the door. "It was the date of our first meeting," he murmured. "Catherine always was a romantic." A dry click confirmed the combination. The door opened slowly. Inside the safe, a metal box, a sealed envelope, and 3 old bank passbooks. Harold took the items with care, as if holding sacred relics. "What's in there?" Maria asked, unable to hide her nerves. He opened the box. Inside were original documents for the land purchase, deeds signed by Catherine in her own name, and a contract transferring shares from her father. And inside the envelope, a letter addressed to him. Harold didn't read it there in front of Maria. He simply placed everything back with care. Then he looked at her steady. "You've just changed everything." Maria felt a shiver down her spine. She didn't yet know what lay ahead. But in that moment, standing beside that man, in that place full of the past, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. "This is unacceptable. We are not going to submit a new motion based on a supposed love letter found by an assistant." Marco Silveira, senior partner at the Silva and Barros law firm, spoke firmly, almost offended. "It's an outrageous risk." Harold Bennett stood with his arms crossed, looking directly at the 2 lawyers in front of him. Behind him, seated discreetly, was Ricardo, the legal consultant who had been with him since the beginning of the case. Standing beside Harold, upright and composed, was Maria Alvarez, now clearly part of the conversation, though no one had offered her a seat. "It's not a love letter," Maria responded calmly. "It's a personal document containing specific, verifiable information about an active account in Mrs. Catherine's name from before the marriage. The existence of that account has been confirmed through official records. It's all here." She extended the folder with the documents, but Marcos didn't take it. Instead, he looked at Harold, waiting for him to shut it down. "I want the firm to present this new line of argument," Harold said firmly. "Mr. Bennett, with all due respect, this exposes us. A discovery like this, coming from outside the legal team, made by an assistant without formal credentials, could easily be disqualified in court. It opens the door for the other side to claim fraud, fabrication, bad faith." "And what have they been doing up until now?" Harold cut in, his voice steady and with no room for rebuttal. "Twisting interpretations, withholding information, exploiting every loophole to take everything I built with my wife. And you, with your full legal team, haven't been able to protect me." The silence that followed was heavy. Maria remained still, but her fingers were tightly interlaced. She felt the weight of the moment. Harold was putting everything on the line, not just his trust, but the entire course of a years-long legal battle, all based on her discovery. "If you're not capable of presenting this argument, I'll find someone who is," Harold concluded, turning to leave. Ricardo stood up quickly and followed. "Mr. Bennett," he corrected himself, "I can work on this line with you. Not officially through the firm, but I can draft the motion and seek a preliminary review from a judge I trust. We just need time." Harold nodded, then turned to Maria. "You're coming with me." Outside the building, Maria walked beside Harold in silence. The midday sun was strong as they crossed the sidewalk with purposeful steps. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sure no one else cares about this case the way you do, and if there's a chance to turn it all around, I won't let it be buried under some lawyer's pride." They spent the following weeks immersed in work. Ricardo secured the support of a retired judge who provided legal consultations. A technical opinion was commissioned, and 2 forensic analysts examined the authenticity of Catherine's letter, as well as the account records from 1981. Everything checked out. The signatures, the dates, the banking data. Not a single inconsistency. Even so, the atmosphere was one of constant tension. On the other side, Harold's sons had hired a new law firm, specialists in estate litigation. They tried to nullify the evidence, contest the documents, and question Maria's credibility. "They're calling you the curious one in the filings," Ricardo said with a sad smile, showing her a section of the case. Maria read it, her expression calm. Good. That means they're scared. Ricardo chuckled, impressed. At the preliminary hearing for reopening the case, the two sides faced each other again after nearly 6 months of judicial silence. Harold's sons were all present. Thomas, the eldest, always in impeccable suits and with the look of someone born giving orders. Benjamin, the middle one, quieter, a hint of guilt in his eyes, and the youngest, Jonathan, arrogant and restless, the only one who never tried to hide his disdain for his father. "I can't believe you're actually doing this," Thomas said to Harold before the session began. "Clinging to some legally baseless story brought by a subordinate employee." "I'm clinging to the truth, Thomas. Something you ought to try sometime." Maria, standing beside Harold, didn't avert her gaze. For the first time, she felt the full weight of the sons' stares and their contempt, but she wasn't shaken. She was there for Catherine, for justice, and out of respect for the man beside her. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He was new to the case, assigned after a redistribution request, a middle-aged man, known for being direct and objective. "We're here to determine whether there is sufficient cause to reopen the evidentiary phase based on new documents presented by Mr. Harold Bennett's party," he began bluntly. "The case file shows that the evidence was presented after the original deadline, but there is mention of possible unintentional concealment and undeclared information. Let's hear the arguments." Ricardo stood and presented the defense. Maria remained seated but observed every detail. The arguments were well structured. Authenticity of the documents, the connection between the account and the disputed assets, the absence of bad faith. The sons' lawyers responded aggressively. They called the letter useless sentimentality, questioned Maria's competence, and tried to discredit the origin of the documents. Then Harold asked to speak. He stood. He didn't need a law degree to command the room. His voice filled it. "I met Catherine when she was 19. She was organized, cautious, meticulous. What she wrote in that letter and what we found on that property confirms everything she ever told me. This isn't about emotion. It's about truth. And if the court believes the truth doesn't deserve to be heard, then go ahead. Take everything from me all at once." The judge remained silent for several long seconds. "This court finds sufficient indication of relevant new facts. The evidentiary phase will be reopened. The assets associated with the mentioned account will be withheld from the estate division until their legal nature is clarified." Maria closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the breath she'd been holding finally escape. On the son's side, only silence and tense expressions. As they exited the courtroom, Harold stopped in front of her. He said nothing for a few seconds. Then, in a low voice, "You gave me back something I thought was lost. You gave me the chance to be heard. I'd say we're even." He shook his head with a faint smile. "Not yet, Maria. Not yet." "They're here, just parked across the street," Ricardo announced, parting the curtain with 2 fingers to peer out the window. Maria nodded silently. They were gathered in Harold's old office, now reorganized as a temporary operations center for the final phase of the case. On the dark mahogany desk, the documents were stacked with surgical precision. She had reviewed everything 3 times that morning. There could be no room for error. "And you?" Ricardo asked, looking at her. "Are you ready?" Maria adjusted her glasses and tightened her hair. "I am. And what's not ready? I'll improvise." Ricardo smiled, not mockingly but with admiration. This woman had come from nothing, overcome every invisible wall the world puts up around people like her, and was now the central figure in a case involving millions of dollars, bitter heirs, and a widower who until recently had lived surrounded by silence. "Just remember," he said seriously, "today isn't about assumptions anymore. Today is about proof." Minutes later, the cars arrived. Harold's son's lawyers entered first. Then came Thomas, Benjamin, and Jonathan, each with a darker expression than the last. The judge, the forensic experts, and representatives from the bank were the last to arrive. Everyone took their seats in the large meeting room reserved for the formal presentation of the recovered physical documents. Harold arrived last. Dark grey suit, no tie, upright posture. His blue eyes sparked with a kind of determination his sons seemed not to recognize anymore. He sat beside Maria, and when she handed him the first folder, he gave a subtle nod. "The floor is yours," the judge announced, folding his hands on the table. Ricardo stood and began the presentation with precision. He explained how the new documents had been located. A safe embedded in the couple's old home, opened using Catherine's personal combination. He presented photos, technical reports, and forensic records, confirming the documents had not been tampered with. Then Maria took the floor. "This is the share transfer contract from Mrs. Catherine's father's company, dated 1980, notarized in her name, under her maiden name," she said, handing the folder to the judge. "And here is the record of the account opened in 1981 at Vale Verde Custody House, directly tied to those shares." She paused, looking directly at Harold's sons. All assets acquired through that account were registered in Mrs. Catherine's name, and there is no evidence she ever transferred those assets into the couple's joint estate. "This is ridiculous," Thomas interrupted, standing. "She was married under a universal community property regime. Everything she owned is, by law, part of the marital estate." "Incorrect," Maria replied firmly, without raising her voice. "The couple's property regime was changed prior to Catherine's death through a public deed. She separated part of the estate as a precaution, as shown in this record here." She handed another document to the judge. Thomas remained standing, his face flushed. Jonathan shifted in his seat with impatience. Benjamin just stared down at his hands, fingers interlaced, as if wishing to disappear. Mr. Bennet had no knowledge of these documents, nor access to the account. Mrs. Catherine's confidentiality and privacy were respected until the end. But now, with these documents in hand, we can state with certainty a substantial portion of the disputed assets is not part of the inheritance, as it never entered the marital estate. The judge glanced over the documents for a few seconds before saying, "I call the court-appointed experts to testify." The two experts confirmed the papers were intact, legitimate, with original seals and dated records. Catherine's signature, compared to dozens of other documents, matched in every detail. "Our conclusion is that there is no evidence of forgery, deliberate omission, or recent fabrication. The documents are authentic," the second expert declared. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Given this, the court recognizes the existence of separate property belonging to the late Catherine Bennet, whose origin and ownership are confirmed by documentary and expert evidence. The assets and funds linked to the identified account shall be removed from the estate and legally transferred to the widower, Mr. Harold Bennet." Thomas stepped forward. "This is outrageous. She never told anyone about this. It's a last-minute fabrication." The judge stared at him sternly. "You are free to appeal, as is your right, but the documents speak for themselves, and so does the law." Thomas stepped back, throwing his folder onto the table. Jonathan left the room without a word. Benjamin, before leaving, approached Harold. I didn't know. If I had, maybe..." He hesitated, glanced at Maria. "Maybe I would have acted differently." Harold simply nodded, without bitterness, but also without softness. It was the kind of answer a man gives when he understands some mistakes can't be fixed with words. After everyone had left, the room was quiet. Only Harold, Maria, and Ricardo remained. The judge was gone, and the silence felt almost sacred. Harold ran his fingers over the documents still on the table. Then he looked at Maria with an expression that couldn't be described in words. "You did the impossible." "I just pieced together what was already there," she replied, smiling humbly. "Mrs. Catherine left the clues. I just followed them." He shook his head, unwilling to let her downplay it. "No, what you did was see what no one else saw, and take a risk because of it." She sat down again, as if finally letting her body relax for the first time in weeks. "You'll be able to reclaim the property and the account. It's substantial. I saw more than I ever imagined. Catherine was more prudent than I gave her credit for." Then he pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. He pushed it toward her. "This is yours." Maria hesitated. "Mr. Bennet, it's the least I can do. For your dedication, your courage, and because now you need to think about your own future." She opened the envelope. Inside was a personal letter of recommendation signed by Harold, proof of enrollment at a prestigious law school, already paid for, and a check. She didn't know what to say. She sat in silence, eyes full but without tears. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Harold looked at her, serious, but with a quiet glow in his eyes. "Because my wife was a visionary, and she would have trusted you. And because if it weren't for you, I'd be here today without my history, without my dignity, and maybe without myself." He extended his hand. Maria shook it. In that gesture, something stronger than a contract was sealed. A bond between two lives that met at the exact moment they needed to and saved each other. "Will you be having the coffee, Mr. Bennett?" asked the young waitress, balancing a tray expertly between the tables of the upscale cafe restaurant he'd been frequenting for years. Harold nodded slightly, not taking his eyes off the folded newspaper in front of him. He was seated by the window, as always, watching the busy street with the calm of someone who no longer needed to chase after anything. His hair was neatly combed, his dark suit impeccable, and his upright posture gave him a quiet authority that still commanded respect. But something was different that day. On the table beside the newspaper was a folder. Inside were the final documents confirming the transfer of assets to his name. The farm was officially back in his possession. Catherine's investment account had been unfrozen and now formed part of his personal estate. The years-long battle was over, and he had won. Not through the power of elite law firms, but through the sensitivity and intelligence of a woman no one saw coming. "And here's your coffee, sir," said the waitress, placing the cup on the table. "Thank you," Harold replied, offering a small smile. As she walked away, he opened the folder and removed a single sheet. Catherine's letter, the original, the one that had changed everything. He read it again for the 100th time, the way she spoke of love and caution, of the future and of memory. Once more, he felt her presence there, not as a shadow of the past, but as a force still guiding him forward. His phone vibrated. A message on the screen. "I'm on my way." He closed the folder gently and leaned back, waiting. Minutes later, Maria walked through the cafe doors. She looked different, more confident. She wore dark slacks, a simple white blouse, and a light grey blazer. Her hair was down, her eyes focused. She walked to the table with purposeful steps, but with that same serene presence that had followed her from the beginning. "Sorry I'm late. My son had a school performance," she said, sitting across from Harold. "Did it go well?" "Very." He played the violin, missed a few notes, but he was so focused that no one cared. Harold smiled genuinely. "I can imagine where he gets that focus." Maria laughed, thankful but without vanity, just the quiet grace of someone who had learned how to accept a compliment without diminishing herself. "Here," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "My acceptance letter. I'm officially enrolled for the first semester. I start in August." He took the envelope, opened it, read it carefully. Then he looked at her. "Are you scared?" "A little. Not of the coursework, but of the new life. Everything changes now." "Change is the only guarantee that we're alive," he said firmly. Maria was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Harold with deeper intent. "Have you ever thought about going back to work? Not like before, but at a different pace. You have too much knowledge to keep to yourself." "I have," he said, eyes steady on hers, "but not for myself. I'd only go back if it had purpose, and with people I trust. People like you, Maria." She looked down, surprised, then smiled, unable to hide it. "Are you serious?" "I am. You didn't just help me recover my assets. You reminded me that I can still build something, and I want to invest in you, in something of ours, a new firm, a different kind of project, ethical, fair, real." Maria sat in silence for a few seconds. This was more than a proposal. It was an invitation to partnership, to build something that went beyond the legal world. It was trust, it was respect, it was the future. "I accept," she said at last, "but only if her name is somewhere in it." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Catherine?" "Yes. Without her, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have been heard." He took a deep breath, nodded. "Then so it will be." Alvarez and Bennett, The Catherine legacy. The Catherine legacy, Maria repeated, moved. I like that. They finished their coffee talking about the project and laughing at little things, at old stories, at future plans. Harold talked about the barn he wanted to renovate at the farm. Maria shared that her son dreamed of having a dog. They exchanged ideas, jotted down possibilities. And when they said goodbye at the cafe door, he held her hand firmly, like someone sealing a pact. See you soon, Maria. Always, Mr. Bennett. He smiled. You can call me Harold, she smiled back. See you soon, Harold. And in that handshake, there was more than respect. There was gratitude, admiration, and something that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Together, they hadn't just won a case. They had defeated forgetfulness, silence, invisibility. They had begun again. Are you sure you don't want me to drive you? Harold asked, standing in front of the freshly painted house, his hands in the pockets of his light blazer, eyes fixed on the front door. Maria appeared in the doorway holding 2 books, her hair pulled into a simple bun and a spark in her eyes that was hard to miss. Her outfit was modest, but she carried herself with a new posture, something that had been quietly building since that morning at the cafe when they agreed to walk forward together. I'm sure. It's just the first day of class. I want to walk, breathe, feel the path, she said with a smile, stepping down the 2 steps of the porch. Harold nodded, but stayed there still, as if trying to capture a moment he didn't want to forget. There was something about that image that spoke louder than any legal document or million-dollar transaction. It was a new beginning. It was life. Did your son already leave? He asked. He did, all excited. Said he wants to be a business owner like you, but also play the violin and have 2 dogs. Maria laughed. He's going to be a handful. Good. The good ones always are, Harold replied, with that calm, steady tone she now knew so well. They walked together to the gate. Maria opened it, turned to him with her backpack on and the books pressed to her chest. I'll text you after class. If you don't reply, I'll know you're out in the field. I will be. Need to check the barn roof, he said proudly, and then stop by the city to handle the office paperwork. I found the building. Really? In the historic center. High ceilings, old windows, needs work, but it has soul. Maria smiled wide. Her eyes welled up, but she hid it. Sounds perfect. It will be. We're going to do this right, she nodded. They looked at each other for a few more seconds, until she took a deep breath and began walking, letting her steps set the rhythm of her new life. Across town, on the quiet grounds of the newly restored old farm, Harold walked among the trees he and Catherine had planted. The apple trees were still there, more twisted, older, but still standing, like him. On the porch of the manor, the furniture had been restored, the wood polished, the fabrics replaced, but the old paintings remained. It was the same house with new energy. In the upstairs office, a new plaque rested on the desk, Alvarez and Bennett, the Catherine legacy. Harold sat before it and opened his laptop. Several messages from partners, vendors, a request for a meeting with a group of young lawyers interested in the project. He still didn't know where it would all lead, but for the first time in many years, that didn't worry him. Because now, it wasn't about wealth or pride. It was about purpose. It was about giving space to those no one listened to. Later that day, Maria walked out of the university slowly. Her first classmates were already discussing the day's topics, the reading list, future plans. She smiled quietly. She was there, really there. The woman who once served coffee and organized files was now a student, and no one could take that from her. When she got home, her son ran to her, excited. "Mom, I got 2 extra points because of my performance." She hugged him tightly. "I told you you could do it. And your class?" "It was perfect," she replied, looking up at the late afternoon sky, where the sun still painted the clouds gold. In the weeks that followed, the office began to take shape. Harold personally oversaw each phase of the renovation. He insisted on choosing the desks, the library books, the flooring details. Maria, always involved, balanced her studies with the project. Gradually, they attracted professionals who shared the same vision: justice with empathy, strategy with integrity. The Bennett case, as it became known behind the scenes of the legal world, became a reference, not because of the numbers, but because of how it was won. Because of the woman no one saw who changed everything. Because of a man who chose to trust again when he'd stopped expecting anything from anyone. Months later, at the official opening ceremony of the firm, Harold stepped up onto the small makeshift stage. Everyone was there. Friends, partners, former colleagues, and new admirers. Beside him stood Maria. He looked around, took a deep breath, and spoke simply. I spent many years believing that losing meant the end, and that after a certain age, you don't start over. But I was wrong. The end only happens when we stop seeing others, when we shut out what we don't recognize. I was saved by someone who was always there, but no one saw her. Today, this firm exists because of her, and in the name of someone who lives on in everything we do. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Maria. She held back her emotions, squeezing his hand. There was nothing left to prove. There, in that space where past, present, and future met, the two of them had created something greater than justice. They had created legacy. They had created belonging. They had created a beginning. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.